So payment schedules, deposits, retainers, what should you be looking for as far as like other than what happens if somebody doesn't show up kind of situation? What else should you see in there?
Making sure that it's clear, again, like what the fee is, making sure it's clear, understanding what any additional costs might be, what there might be additional costs for. Like, so making sure the services are very clearly described and understanding what might be extra on top of that. Things that come to mind are like with photographers, if you're adding albums, if I decide later on that I want to add an album, what does that cost look like? Or is an album included in my total fee? Like that happens too. So making sure you're understanding that. From if you're working with planners or venues, like understanding where the cost of extra staff might kick in or if everything's included. But then, so under getting a grasp on the total that you're paying and then when those payments are due. So like what is the deposit or retainer that gets paid upon contract signing? Are there installment payments? Does the balance just get paid a couple of weeks or a month before the wedding? Making sure that it's really clear when the money gets paid.
Hi, I'm Caitlin.
And I'm Kaylee, and this is
Shoot the Vows. And today we have a special guest. We have Leah Weinberg with us from Weinberg Legal.
Yay! Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, could you do a brief introduction of yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm the owner of Weinberg Legal, which is a law firm based in New York City. My very quick backstory is that I started my adult life as an attorney, and then I was a wedding planner for not just a hot second, I was going to say a hot second, but far longer than a hot second for almost 10 years. And then now I have gone back to being a lawyer for small businesses with a focus on wedding and event professionals.
That's awesome. I think so many wedding and event professionals, like myself, you know, you start off with just like a little template. You start off not really knowing where to start. And then as you scale, it's really important to get a lawyer to look over your contracts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always say everybody's got to start somewhere. And then once, as the business grows and you have more money to spend on, like,
that's when you start
getting legit and things like that. That's when it's time to talk to a lawyer to make sure all your bases are covered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people they think it's really expensive and so they avoid it, but getting sued is also expensive. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And if you find the right lawyer, like it's honestly not as expensive as people might think it is. So
that's good.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about why it's important for both the couple and the vendor to have a contract?
Yeah. The contract, a detailed, thorough contract is really good for both sides because it makes sure that you aren't left guessing when something goes wrong. And also it's clear, it outlines the details of the event. It outlines the obligations and responsibilities of both sides. And then, yeah, when something doesn't go the way it's supposed to, we can look back to the contract to tell us what to do instead of guessing of like, or arguing about what's going to happen. So the contract should be really clear. And so couples shouldn't hesitate to sign vendor contracts. Vendors should have solid contracts because it really is meant to benefit both sides.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
What about...
Oh, no, you go ahead.
What about those contracts that the bride and groom might feel like favor more towards the vendor rather than benefit them?
Yeah, it's natural that a vendor's contract is going to be somewhat more favorable to the vendor. That is definitely by design. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's like unfair or just egregious against the couple. But couples need to understand that like this is the vendor's livelihood. This is their small business. They are doing dozens of these. Sometimes, if you're a DJ, sometimes DJs do over 100 events a year. Mm-hmm. And this is a one-time thing in that moment. Well, you know, obviously it could be a multiple-time thing, but we're all hoping it's most cases it's a one-time thing that the couple is investing in and spending money on. And so if a vendor was liable for every little thing that happened, even if it was outside their control, at every event that they did, it's not going to make sense for them to continue being a small business owner. Like you just can't afford it financially at a certain point. And so that's why we're kind of allocating the risk the way that we are, is because the vendors, this is how they make their money. They are doing this many, many times a year. And for the people getting married, it's that one-time thing in this moment for them.
Right. And I mean, God forbid you have couple that they get a little rowdy and they break something, like might as well have the contract and the stipulations put in place beforehand so they know what the repercussions of their actions are.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's really helpful for people to understand the United States has a very unique problem in that we like to sue each other, and there's very little barrier to entry to bringing legal action against somebody. Whereas other countries, like it is truly, I've talked with lawyers in other countries, it is not the same as it is here. And so helping couples understand that like vendors can frankly get sued at the drop of a hat. If for something they weren't even responsible for, they could find themselves wrapped up in litigation related to that. And so again, that's why like in that moment, the responsibility has to be on the couple and not the vendor for the financial aspect of those things.
That makes perfect sense. And for couples that are reading over contracts before signing, is there anything they should really be looking out for that might be a red flag or...
Yeah, the thing, so it's funny. So most of my clients are wedding and event professionals and the small business owners. So I'm always talking to them about like what they need in their contract. And there's one thing that comes to mind that I always tell them, like, please do not have this in your contract. And that is a free termination right. And so that is a right on either side to just walk away for no reason. And in the way most people draft that, yeah, there are going to be some consequences. So like if the couple walked away without cause, they might forfeit their retainer or their deposit. If the vendor walked away without cause, they might have to be giving money back. But I don't love a free termination right. No surprise, as a lawyer, I believe like a contract is a contract. The people signing it.
Sounds dangerous.
I know. Yeah. The people signing it should understand like you're signing up for obligation. So the couple, you are promising to hire this person to photograph your wedding, and you, the photographer, are promising to show up and photograph the wedding. And if neither party's done anything wrong, you should both have to fulfill those obligations. So with couples, when they're reading the contract, make sure you're paying attention to those termination rights, because if your vendor has a free termination right, there is nothing that stops them from canceling the week of your wedding. And all they have to do is give you your money back, which, okay, you get your money back, but then
now you have a week to figure out a new venue or photographer or DJ or whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
That's really scary.
Yeah. And so I feel like it's not like I'm giving away any surprises that I wouldn't already tell to my clients by saying this, because I'm like, I don't want you to have that in your contract either. So that's definitely a very big one. And one of the examples I give, like with a venue, is what happens if a venue, they have a free termination right. All they have to do is give you your money back. If they terminate, let's say they get an offer for like a event that's like 3 times as more profitable for them.
They cancel on the first one.
And their contract gives them the right to do it. And they weigh like the cost benefit of like, okay, yeah, we'll probably get a negative review for this, but hey, we are doing this
and we're making
legally
3 times the more amount than we were.
That's
exactly.
Terrible.
So,
and there's nothing the couple could do.
No, because
that's
it's
not
in the contract.
You're allowed to do it contractually. So
because
that
they
is like,
can too, though, because not just the venue or the host or whoever, but also the person signing the contract can back out.
Correct. In the free termination right example. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's why
that's good to know.
Instead, what everybody needs to have is a default provision. And it says like, if the client isn't doing X, Y, and Z, then this happens. And if the vendor isn't doing X, Y, and Z, then this happens.
More to hold people accountable.
Exactly. And again, like getting back to what I said, the purpose of the contract, when somebody's not doing what they're supposed to, you can look to the contract to figure out what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And not be left guessing as to, oh, the client hasn't paid. The couple hasn't paid. As the vendor, do I have to show up on their, like, do I still have to show up on their wedding day? Do I not?
Yeah.
If I don't, like, I'm still, if you don't show up and the contract doesn't allow you to do that, then technically the vendor's then in breach, and we just get really complicated.
Really
so that's
messy,
why, like,
gray, muddy.
Good contracts, they're going to be a little bit lengthy. Don't be afraid of those. Like, they are there to protect both you and the vendor.
And I think also not even just protecting, but it's also good to lay out what to expect from your vendors.
Yeah.
Like it's not, and I think so many people don't read through the contract, but there's so many things that then they will ask questions about things in the contract that they signed.
Yes.
Like, you should probably know that. At least do like a chat GPT summary or
Yes.
something.
I mean, moral of the story, read your contracts.
Yes.
Like they might be long and ask I mean, you're not a lot of couples, they're not trained lawyers. They're not expected to know these. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Google things, ask other people, ask the vendor if there's something you don't understand, but please read your
Yes.
contracts so you know what's in there.
Yes.
Which, and I totally agree. I 110%, like, even like a rebuttal, like just talking to him, saying you didn't understand. I know whenever Caitlin hired me on, we had a contract and I was like, hey, I don't understand X, Y, and Z. I don't get why this is in here. What about this?
Yep.
And I laid it out of this is what I didn't understand. This is what I am understanding from this. How do we fix it? How do we go about it? And we fixed it. We handled it. We
Right.
talked it out. And it's just that
You have a
simple
conversation.
sometimes.
Yeah. And I really like what you said about like setting the expectations too of what's happening, because that's done within the contract. And it's also so important to do it just outside from a practical perspective, like understanding what the service is that the person's providing. What is the process going to be like? Asking questions, like couples asking questions of their vendors during those initial calls, just to really understand like what is your role going to be in this process?
Yeah.
What can I expect from you? Because we all forget, again, we do this so many times. And again, this is the couple's first time, again, most cases doing this. Like we take a lot of things for granted and sometimes forget that they have no clue.
Yeah, I think sometimes couples are afraid to ask questions. I always get excited when they do. And sometimes, I mean, it's probably the most commonly asked question that I get from couples is what happens if you can't show up to the wedding day, which is a great question. Please ask. But it also breaks my heart because sometimes it's like, well, some people don't have that answer. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, no. Like,
we've got people on standby. We've got
if I pass away, my husband knows what to do with your images.
Yes.
Like, I got backups of backups.
Husband's calling up Kaylee and we're figuring it out.
Yeah, but
exactly. Yeah. I mean, and yes, the vendor should have an answer to that question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What happens if a vendor goes out of business or cancels your contract? Then what do you do if, you know?
Yeah, again, it's going to depend on some of what the specific contract terms are. I like to let people know, like the vendor going out of business example does happen from time to time. Several years ago, there were some like major stories from New York City of a venue that went out of business and took everybody's money and all of that stuff. I do like to always assure couples you can purchase insurance that does protect you against some of those things. So event cancellation insurance not only can protect you if the event is impacted by some kind of bizarre event, but also if a vendor goes out of business and takes your money or doesn't have the money to refund you. So that's something to look into to protect yourself against. And in terms of whether a vendor can cancel the contract, again, that goes back to that free termination right. So we really only want the vendor to be able to cancel if you, the couple, are not doing something that you're supposed to. So examples of things like that, if you, the couple, are not paying, if you, the couple, are ghosting your vendor and like not being communicative at all and not getting back to them on things, if you owe the vendor something, whether it's a questionnaire or a checklist or some kind of information, if you're not providing that, they should be able to say, hey, you've got to give this to me or otherwise I have a right to terminate. And so those are the things that clients and couples should be obligated to do. And that is when the vendor should have some kind of recourse. But again, the vendor shouldn't just be able to be like, oh, nope, I don't want to do this anymore, or I got a better offer somewhere else. Like, I'm just going to terminate my contract.
So one thing that I see, I think photographers the most like complaining about, and it typically happens with venues, but some of these vendors will put in their contracts that the couple has to give them their images from the photographer. Is that something couples should be aware of that they need to do? I mean, because they have a contract with the photographer and they have one with the venue.
Yeah.
And that could be confusing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So helpful, just like little background information for the couple. So the use of images from a wedding when you're thinking of another vendor, it's a two-step process. So like me, when I was a planner, being able to use photos from a wedding was a two-step process. Number one, I've got to get permission from the couple to be able to use photos with them in it, because you own your likeness. People aren't able to use a photo of you without your permission. So my contracts would always say I have permission from the couple to use photos of them. And then the second part of that consent process is, as a planner, I would have to get permission from the photographer or videographer. So couples should know, they should be prepared to see in their contracts with anybody other than the photographer, usually some kind of language that says they have the right to use the photos with the client in them. But the couple can also understand that they can't give permission on behalf of the photographer. So like if you are a couple and you see that in your venue contract, it's absolutely helpful to remind the venue that, hey, while I'm okay saying you can use photos of us, just know that you're going to have to go to our photographer or our videographer and get permission to be able to use them as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know we're in New York State. Are those... Is that kind of like nationwide, you could assume?
Pretty much, yeah. There's different consequences to using photos of somebody without their permission. Like in some states, it's a misdemeanor to do so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we don't want to...
Watch out.
The level of how bad it is that you're doing it is varies state by state, but across the board, like you've got to get somebody's permission to use photos of them.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Could you briefly explain what force majeure is?
Yes. So force majeure means superior force in French, technically speaking. And that is all the things we think of when we think of like act of God, casualty situations, fire, hurricane, blizzard, pandemics, which is all part of our definition now, government action, like strikes, just anything that's really outside of somebody's control, and is what a force majeure event is. So as the couple, you want to make sure that there's a definition of force majeure because it can mean different things. There's like a generally accepted definition, but for contract purposes, we want to be specific about what it means. And then we want to make sure the contract says what happens if your event is impacted by a force majeure event. So like day of the wedding, there's a blizzard and we can't have the wedding. What happens in that situation? Maybe week of the wedding, the venue burns down and we can't have the wedding. Like what happens in that situation? Again, that's why we've got to have those detailed contracts, because when that happens, we don't want to all be left with like, what are we supposed, like, we never imagined this would happen. What are we supposed to do? Your contract in a perfect world should tell you what you need to be doing.
So let me ask, I know everybody right now, because it's the economy, is trying to, cut corners, make budget happen. I get it. I totally understand. I agree. But what do they do about like their Aunt Sally who wants to, photograph their wedding and there isn't a contract? Or what about, Uncle Dan who's going to cook the food? Or how would you recommend go about like that situation?
You're not going to like my answer because my answer is don't have friends or family be your wedding vendors in the first place.
I agree with you.
I know it's all, sometimes we can't avoid it. I have something simple, I guess. But in that situation, I would say to the couple, I would say, okay, if this person didn't do what they're supposed to, what are you going to do about it anyway? Like, would you sue Uncle Bob if he didn't like bring the food? So that's part of it too. Like if you
and even if it's not a family member, and even if it's just like my best friend Sarah, her aunt does photos and she's going to give me a discount. How do they go about that line of affordability and legality and like being safe there?
Yeah, it's really tough. My rule of thumb for everybody is you should be hiring vendors that are professionals who do this as their job. They understand everything that comes along with this. And so a reputable professional vendor should have a contract. You said, what are red flags? The lack of a contract is kind of a red flag. And so sometimes you're just going to have to make an exception. So here's actually a really great example. When I was planning, I was referring I did mostly full planning. So I'm referring vendors to my couples and my clients. And I remember there was one hair and makeup team who had a very, very brief contract. It was like a half a page long, maybe a page long.
Like pay us ?
Yeah, right. It's like, here's where we're going to show up. Here's how much we owe you. This is what we're doing for you. Like, this end of story, nothing else.
Wow.
And my clients would come to me and they would say, hey, this feels a little like short. What should we do about it? And I would always say, I'm like, I know them. I can vouch for them. Like they are reputable. And also they're not going to change they're not going to redraft an entire contract just for you. But the couple in that situation, they would have to decide, like, are they comfortable both with my recommendation and the experience they've had with that vendor so far. So if you are in a situation where like a friend's sister is doing your invitations and she doesn't have a contract, depending on like how much money you're paying her, how short of a timeline she's on, like how high stakes this is, are you willing to take that risk that something might happen if you don't have a contract in writing?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So payment schedules, deposits, retainers, what should you be looking for as far as like other than what happens if somebody doesn't show up kind of situation? What else should you see in there?
Making sure that it's clear, again, like what the fee is, making sure it's clear, understanding what any additional costs might be, what there might be additional costs for. Like, so making sure the services are very clearly described and understanding what might be extra on top of that. Things that come to mind are like with photographers, if you're adding albums, if I decide later on that I want to add an album, what does that cost look like? Or is an album included in my total fee? Like that happens too. So making sure you're understanding that. From if you're working with planners or venues, like understanding where the cost of extra staff might kick in or if everything's included. But then, so under getting a grasp on the total that you're paying and then when those payments are due. So like what is the deposit or retainer that gets paid upon contract signing? Are there installment payments? Does the balance just get paid a couple of weeks or a month before the wedding? Making sure that it's really clear when the money gets paid.
Okay.
Is
Clear
super
and
important.
legible contract.
Yes.
And what's the difference between a deposit and a retainer and what's refundable and what's not refundable?
Yeah. So I always tell people in a vacuum, retainer and deposit means different things. But in most cases, the language in the contract surrounding them is going to make it non-refundable. But if we want just a little fun legal lesson here for anybody listening. So a retainer serves a function the day that it's paid. So like that retainer think of it like the retainer has a job. So the retainer, when it's paid, reserves the date of the event, compensates your vendor for putting that date on the calendar for either starting to perform the services or committing to perform the services. And it also compensates your vendor for turning down work, which is a really big thing because like for a lot of folks, you can only do one event a day, or maybe you take only a certain number of events each year. So once you hit that cap, you're turning work away. So that retainer is meant to really compensate your vendor for lost job opportunities. A deposit, on the other hand, is just money paid towards something in the future. It doesn't have that job on day one. It doesn't serve a function. And then in a lot of the ways deposit is used, it can be refundable, like a security deposit is what a lot of people think of or things like that. So it's money paid towards something in the future. It doesn't serve a purpose day one. That being said, if your vendor has language in their contract that says the deposit is non-refundable because it reserves the date of your event,
So
it
that's
compensates
a retainer,
you.
but they're calling it.
Yeah, it's still the contract language is going to win. So just because it's called a deposit doesn't mean you're getting your money back. So like I said, in a vacuum, they mean different things, but you always have to understand what language comes with it in the contract.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And if there's no figures in the actual contract and the contract refers you over to an invoice, is that also legally binding, what's in the invoice that you have to pay?
It is. It is going to be legally binding. I just always want to make, like, for couples, make sure that it's clear how that all is functioning, though, and that you are actually seeing the invoice. So a lot of vendors will use online like software where it like gives you the proposal and the invoice, and then the contract comes after it. So it like references back up to that. But if you're just given like a PDF to sign and it references an invoice or proposal that like you haven't really seen or that's not anywhere associated with it, make sure we're like putting those documents together so that it's clear like what you're signing up to.
Okay, that makes sense. And is there any fine print that people should really, I mean, we did say read the entire contract.
Read the entire contract.
But maybe fine print to look out for or...
Yeah, it's really just understanding the basics. So getting a good grasp on what services the person's providing and the payment terms, checking for those hidden like term-free termination rights that, again, I don't love. Understanding, I mean, a really big thing, this isn't even necessarily fine print, but make sure you understand your vendor's rescheduling and cancellation provisions. Part of the reason why, so going back to earlier in the conversation about how things might seem unfavorable, if you cancel your wedding the week of, frankly, no matter the cause, whether it's a force majeure event or you happen to, break up or change your mind, whatever, your vendor's probably getting paid in full. And you as the couple are not going to be happy about that because you're like, well, you didn't do anything. Like you didn't ultimately show up and perform on the wedding day. And it's like, but that's what's kind of fair to the vendor in that situation. Again, you can buy insurance. You frankly control whether you break up or not.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. And so why should your vendor be financially penalized for something like that?
Especially because they could have already had somebody else booked that day.
Correct. They've been turning down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially. Yeah. So those are things, but like really make sure you understand that rescheduling and cancellation. We've seen, obviously, nobody predicted COVID to happen, and that just threw everybody for a loop.
Yeah,
and so nobody really even paid attention to rescheduling provisions, frankly, until that happened. But now, like, unpredictable things happen. I think weather events are just going to continue to get even more and more unpredictable. And so really making sure you understand what it looks like if we have to reschedule, what it looks like if we cancel, when does our vendor get to keep money, when are they giving money back, all of that stuff is really important. And then if you haven't already, make sure you're looking into event cancellation insurance, please. Like, it's just for the cost, the protection that it gives you for like that small investment. Couples can really have a lot of protection if they,
especially because you're spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for this day.
Some people, I had an inquiry the other day, and their budget was $75,000, and it's like that's a lot of money to spend.
That is a lot of money
to not read contracts and not be aware of what's
going on,
and not have insurance. I bet they're going to get insurance.
I tell everybody. So when I was planning, I would always have at the very beginning of the planning process with my clients, I would say, hey, I want to tell you about event cancellation insurance, and it is your option whether you want to do it. It's really dependent on like how risk averse you are. And only one couple who booked me in 2019 decided to take me up on that. They purchased their policy, I believe, in December of 2019. And then when they canceled their wedding in the summer of 2020, they got all their money back within weeks.
Amazing.
I was frankly shocked how easy of a process it was for them. But it was clear, because we didn't, it was an unknown thing at that time. Obviously now event cancellation insurance doesn't cover COVID, full disclosure. But it's going to protect you against so many other things that you just really can't contemplate and predict. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess in closing, if you wanted to walk away from a contract, you got to look for that, the terms, but
exactly.
Is that the best way to?
Yes. And you learn, I'm so proud of you. Like you actually, you answered the question for me. And I say the same thing to vendors too. Like you can't terminate a contract unless the contract says you can terminate the contract. Yeah. And so if you just decide to walk away, like you're in breach, they can bring a vendor could bring legal action against you. And same thing, knowing it on the vendor side too. Yeah. They just can't change their mind and say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I said,
just kidding.
Right. Or like we got, again, like, oh, I got a better offer for something else that I want to take. Like they can't do that either unless the contract says it. So that's why it's really important. Again, like I'll harp on it all day long. Like contracts that feel long, that feel formal shouldn't be scary. They really are meant to benefit everybody involved. But again, it's super important to read the contract, understand it, ask questions, ask Google questions. I don't love asking. I will never say ask ChatGPT questions. I know people are going to do that. But yeah, there's just plenty of ways to make sure that you're understanding the contract before you sign it.
I see in so many Facebook groups, people asking legal questions and all the comments, what's in your contract? What does your contract say? To both sides, to brides and to professionals.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why you really, as an attorney for a lot of wedding and event event professionals, I try to think of, you can't be specific about every little thing that could happen, but you try to protect against stuff, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So that way, again, we're not left asking questions. That's what I really want for everybody. Like if something goes wrong, if somebody's, if somebody breaks their leg and they can't be there on the wedding day, what happens? I want your contract to talk about that situation. If somebody is sick and hasn't delivered their photos on time, what do we do in that situation? I want your contract to talk about it.
It's just better to have everything covered under the umbrella.
Yes.
Exactly. Safer for everyone involved.
Exactly.
Is there anything that you can't legally put in your contract? Like that it just wouldn't hold up in court or it's not lawful?
Yeah. So one of the big things is everybody's always responsible for their gross negligence and willful misconduct. So even if a contract limits the liability of your vendor and they do something really wrong, they're going to be responsible for that. Same thing on your end. If you are at something happens on the wedding day and I don't know, I can think my brain gets really weird because I can think of all the really just bizarre things. But let's say you're the couple getting married, day of the wedding, you maybe have a disagreement with the DJ and you knock the DJ's speakers over. You are going to be, no contract will save you from having done property damage. You're going to be responsible for that. So that
actions have repercussions.
Yes. So that's a big thing I always say is your contract's never going to save you when somebody has done something
that makes total sense. I think that's all we have for today. So that pretty much covers up legal troubles and contracts, unless you had anything to add.
Yeah, no, I think we hit everything. I think it's just we touched on some really good, big, important points for folks to remember in terms of making sure they read stuff, they understand it, understanding why we're allocating the risk differently between the vendor and the couple. All of that is just, I think, going to help make that hopefully make the process smoother as
the vendor has more to lose than the couple at the end of the day.
Yep.
So it makes sense that most contracts are going to favor them.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for
thanks for having me.
Coming. Well, we came here.
Yeah, we're so glad to come here and experience and see it all.
Yeah, we're in New York City for anyone that didn't know. And for the people that are just listening, we're in a different space. So it was
pretty though.
Yeah, it was fun getting here and setting up and interviewing you.
Yeah, this was my first live in-person podcast recording. So I'm super excited too.
Yeah.
I think we had a lot of good banter between us all and a lot of good information and knowledge.
No, I learned a lot too.
I did too.
Yeah.
I'm not even getting married.
One day.
Who knows?
All right. Thank you so much for coming on, Leah. Of course. And as always, guys, if you have any comments or questions, drop them down below in the comment section.
We'd love to feature it in a future video.
And we have new episodes every Thursday at 10 a.m.
Subscribe.